This is being recorded on the 2nd of June 2020, and it's a day when many people are observing Black Lives Matter in support of terrible events in the United States. So what better or more appropriate painting to talk about in these very difficult times than the amazing Liberty Leading the People by Eugene Delacroix, which is one of the highlights of a visit to the Louvre in Paris. So what Delacroix could never really have envisaged is exactly how influential this picture has become over the years. At first, people were unsure about it, and it was taken out of public view. But certainly when he died, it was put back in the Louvre, and forever after has been a major icon for France. Certainly on the visits that I have done to the Louvre, the picture forms a very important part of any visit. It's very normal to see elderly French people in tears in front of the painting, as it represents the dawn of a new era for them. And I suppose you might also describe the end of the revolutionary period. And it's also wonderful to see groups of very small school children with their teachers in front of the painting, and that's a very normal thing. And so from that point of view, the picture is very important for French people. But what we'll do, though, is we'll take a look at, as I've been doing before, we'll take a look at some of Delacroix's early life in context of how this painting sits. So this is not an early painting by Delacroix, but it is a wonderful self-portrait which is in the Louvre. The date is 1837 for this painting, but he's born actually at the end of the 18th century. So he's born in 1798. He comes from quite a well-to-do middle-class family. His father is a government minister in a previous French administration. And there's a slight hint of scandal regarding Eugene Delacroix's birth, in that it's said by some historians that actually it's one of his father's contemporaries, a man called Talleyrand, who is possibly Delacroix's father. But this is an unsubstantiated rumour. Nevertheless, he grows up as a young kid going to very high standard Parisian schools. He ends up studying under a well-respected Parisian artist called Pierre Guérin, who also was the art teacher of Theodore Géricault, who in many ways is a sort of mentor for Eugene Delacroix. Eugene Delacroix, for example, is one of the models in the famous Raft of the Medusa painting. But this picture here demonstrates his wonderful painterly style. What we mean by painterly style is a beautiful application of colour, great use of colour, and a very individual approach to painting. This painting is called The Death of Sardanapalus from 1827, and this is in the Louvre, and this is an earlier painting by Delacroix that predates the Liberty Leading the People by 3 years. What we're looking at here is a Assyrian king, so this is 800 BC, and this is an allegorical story. It's a mythological story. It's based in fact, but it can't be called fact because the last Assyrian king was definitely not called Sardanapalus. Ashurbanipal would be the actual name, but anyway, the king is here, nonchalantly lying on his bed, wearing fabulous jewels and clothes. But he has encroaching hordes on the city and decides they won't get to him. He's just going to slaughter everybody that he knows. And he's drunk and he's got concubines in his royal bedchamber. And he instructs his soldiers to execute all of these girls. And then he's going to take the soldiers up to the palace and they're going to set fire to themselves, and that's the end. So this subject matter was considered outrageous by Parisians 200 years ago. The picture is, as you can see, a riot of colour. It's a fabulous composition, which is pretty complicated. And it's also very racy. So immediately after the original exhibition, this was taken out of public view. and Delacroix received really bad notices for this painting. It's worth saying, actually, that the Paris Salon was a pretty complicated procedure for French artists in those days. There was really no other way to attract attention, because if you were accepted into the Paris Salon, which was like an annual exhibition, then that meant that you had potential customers from that moment onwards. One of the huge difficulties of the Salon was making sure that your pictures were in a prominent position within the exhibition area. And for those of you that know the Louvre, there's a beautiful room which is just before you get to the Italian gallery where all the famous paintings are. And it's called the Salon Carré, and that is the room that was used for the Paris Salon for 100 years or more. But the problem there is that some of the painters had what's known as skying issues, whereby their pictures were put so high up on the walls that they were almost invisible. So the idea was to have your painting at eye level, preferably, so people could actually see it. We say this all the time in paintings, but this one is such a typical example of a picture you would love to have seen at the time when it was actually painted, because it would have been really quite shocking from the observers of that time. Strange, though it may be for us to appreciate. Okay, here, of course, this is the famous picture itself, Liberty Leading the People, from 1830. And what it is a painting that accurately portrays the July Revolution that occurred on 3-4 days, the 26th, the 30th of July, 1830. Delacroix paints this actually in the autumn, so he takes 3 months to paint the picture, and it's finished by December, although it doesn't go on exhibition until the end of the following spring, so it's May 1831 when it ends up in the Salon. Of course, what he's really doing is mixing an allegorical mythological figure, which is here represented by the figure of Liberty holding the tricolour. And he's mixing that with actual reality on the ground of people rioting in this mini-revolution that occurred. So what he's trying to do is to mix these different elements, and in that he's very successful. So we can see that the picture has got a very strong pyramid structure. We can see that, and then there's more sort of horizontal lines at the bottom. But we have several different figures here who interest us. We have this figure here who is probably a sailor, and he's got a musket there. We've got a well-dressed man here in a top hat, but of course back to 200 years, lots of people wore top hats. However, he is dressed smarter, and he's got a rather posh-looking gun. So he may come from, say, the merchant classes. Some people say that this figure here represents Delacroix himself, but again, that's unsubstantiated. This figure here at the feet of Liberty, wearing the blue shirt, is a print worker, probably. How do we know that? Well, costume historians suggest so. The print workers were important because they were actually the first people involved on the 27th of July for the initial stages of the July Revolution. French history in the 19th century is very complicated. So this period of time is, I suppose, just towards the end of the monarchist restoration. So it's the end of the Napoleonic period. And at the time, it was a king called Charles X who was the king of France, and he made mistakes in trying to re-establish what was known as the Ancien regime, which was the absolute power of the French monarch. French people did not like that. Okay, going back to the figures in the painting. On the right-hand side, we have this figure here who is wearing a student cap, so we presume that he is representing the students. And it's said that this figure here was the inspiration for the character of Gavroche from Les Miserables, which is no doubt probably true. On the ground, we've got a dead royalist soldier. This figure here down on the bottom left that you can see, who is half naked, is very similar to a figure in The Raft of the Medusa by Géricault that's half naked and lying in. Well, let's just quickly take a look at that. Let's move forward a couple of images. Here we go. This is the figure I meant. And we can see that there are similarities here. However, there may be a deeper meaning for the image of this person here, because there's only one other person in the image who's got flesh showing, and that's Liberty. And so the figure down on the bottom left may represent a kind of classic heroism, the sort of fallen hero. And we can perhaps look back even to the legend of Hector, who was King Priam's son, who was dragged remorselessly around Troy by Achilles. And this blue stocking that he's wearing may represent the way that Hector had rope attached to his ankles at the back of the chariot. That can't be substantiated, but of course it's possible that Delacroix used that fallen image, heroic concept for this particular figure. So the figure of Liberty herself is clearly the kind of allegorical image, and she's represented as an image of Marianne, who was the kind of goddess of liberty, I suppose, that the French people from the French Revolution onwards, 1789, hugely respected, and her image appears everywhere in France today. And also, for those of you from the United States, she would be the basis for your Statue of Liberty. It's said that this figure from this great painting directly influenced the Statue of Liberty. That again can't be proven, but certainly it would have certainly have influenced the sculptors. There's no doubt about that. She's holding the tricolore, which is the French flag, and also she's got a musket in her hand. And then the way that this dress reveals the top half of her body is indicative of certainly the way that classical goddesses were portrayed. There are a couple of examples in the Louvre itself. Venus de Milo, the sculpture without any arms, is an example of the way that she's bare-breasted in the same way. And also the winged victory of Samothrace is also similar in that sense. So what Delacroix has done is that he's painted this dress with a very kind of classical fold style to it, which is it gives us an idea that perhaps this is really what he intended. In the background, we can see these are the two towers of Notre Dame. And I'm just going to zoom in on a couple of things. If we look here at her head, it looks in the previous image as if she's just got an elaborate hairstyle, but she's in fact wearing a cap. This is called a Phrygian cap, Phrygian. And this was a symbol, a republican symbol of the revolution in the 1790s in France. Originally, this cap was a very bright red, and when Liberty Leading the People went back on exhibition in 1855, Delacroix was asked if he would modify the colour of this cap, and he agreed to do that. So, to be clear about this painting was not on public view for several decades. So, it was painted in 1830, but it didn't go back on display until 1855, after this modification had been made. As well as this, everyone, if you look here, this is a close-up of Notre Dame. And we can see here, at the top left, there is the French national flag, the tricolor, flying. And it's said that actually during the July Revolution, Delacroix was particularly taken by the fact that this actually happened. So that flag was flying from the top of the towers, and he felt inspired to do something about it. I went forward one slide there, but this is a wonderful painting which is actually next door to Liberty Leading the People in the Louvre today. This is the Raft of the Medusa by Theodore Géricault, who was a real kind of mentor to Delacroix, that's for sure. And Delacroix himself is actually a model in this painting. This is him here, with his head down and one arm outstretched. So Delacroix was a young art student when this was done. We can also see the beautiful way that the sky and clouds are painted. So we can see there's a sort of storm coming. What Delacroix does not do is give us an actual, real position of this. I mean, it's the figure is storming the barricades, encouraging the rioters to follow her. The rioters, of course, as I've already said, they come from all stratas of French society. But there is no actual position of these barricades. I suppose one could say, oh yeah, okay, just turn left at Notre Dame, but it's clear that the images of Notre Dame there and Parisian buildings are in the distance. Nevertheless, the presence of the cathedral in the background obviously offers some form of context for the painting. And also it balances the composition really well. So from that point of view, it's a very clever idea to include the cathedral there. Okay, what we'll do is we'll move on and see some of the more modern works that have been influenced by the great painting. But as well, we can see a preparation drawing that Delacroix made for paintings. Let's just move forward a couple of slides. Here we go. This is a fabulous drawing. He would have done dozens of these. Delacroix left behind a massive body of work. There were thousands of drawings, about 900 paintings, lithographs, watercolours, all sorts. So over a long life, he died at 65 years old. And so this is an example of one of his drawings. This is a poster, I suppose, from 1936. And it's done by a German artist, but he has a British name, and his name is John Hartfield. And he changed his name, in fact, during World War I because he disliked the anti-British sentiment, where people were sort of walking through the streets going, "May God punish England." And we can see, obviously, the famous painting in the background. And then that slogan at the bottom, translated from German into English, is something along the lines of freedom itself fights in their lines. So Liberty Leading the People became this famous image for liberation, for freedom, and probably Picasso's Guernica took up the mantle after that was painted in the middle, like between World War I and World War II. But up until that point, this painting is used, and as we'll see, for a lot of different protests. This image here is on the back of the security fence that separates Israel from Palestine. And you can see the modification that's been made with regard to the flag and the images, but particularly, for example, this figure here is very similar to the way that the famous painting is, and also this figure here, it does look similar. This is from a Parisian street artist called P-Boy, and this is actually in the northeast of Paris, up close to the Périphérique. And it was done in the September, October of 2019, and clearly, as we can see here, it is a protest which was organised by the yellow vests that dominated the French news for a while. So it's clearly taken, obviously, from Delacroix's painting, a fabulous image, no doubt. This painting here is in the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, and this is homage to Delacroix, and this is by Henri Fantin-Latour, and it was 1860s. This painting comes from, And obviously this is Delacroix's image here, but there's a few important people who are in the painting, so let's take a look at who they are. This is the artist James Whistler. This is Edouard Manet. This is the poet Charles Baudelaire. All of them paying respect to the great artist. So it's an example of Delacroix's reputation increasing massively after his death. There's a great quote from Paul Cézanne, the great impressionist, post-impressionist painter, who said, "We all paint in Delacroix's language." But actually my favourite quote from a massive artist was from Picasso, the great Spanish painter, probably the most talented painter of the 20th century, who painted a painting similar to Delacroix's Women of Algiers. And Picasso said, "That bastard, he's really good." And so obviously that's a great quote. Delacroix appears, he did appear on the back of the 100 franc banknote in France. This is, you can see the date here, this is 1993. And so he of course would have been deeply honoured to have known this, but my guess is he would not have approved of the quality of this imaging here. It's not that great, but nevertheless, it just spreads the fame of the painting, or it would have done during that time. Unfortunately, the picture, which was on exhibition up in the north of France, in Lens actually, in 2013 got spray painted. So the Louvre have got this kind of what I suppose you'd call an overflow museum up there. And this is a protest group from 9/11, I think it's architects and engineers or something like that. It's a pretty strange way to protest. It's a deeply unfortunate thing to do. I found it incredibly upsetting to walk into the museum and read about what had happened, because of course I'm used to seeing the picture on a pretty regular basis, and it's distressing when this happens to a work of art. It actually happened in London not that long ago in the National Gallery. Gainsborough painting was slashed with a knife, and that's the reason why we now have security checks at the National Gallery, because of that. Anyway, this spray paint was quite easily removed. It didn't even penetrate the varnish layer on the painting, and that is a huge relief. So it didn't take the staff of the Louvre long to remove this, but it did take a while before the picture was put out on view again, and my guess is I doubt they'll lend it for exhibitions in the future. I mean, the condition of the painting is pretty good overall, so I can't see a problem with that. Here we see obviously quite a famous image of the painting. This is on the 2008 Coldplay album Viva la Vida. So of course this is introducing the painting possibly to a new generation of people, so why not? This gives you some idea of the massive scale of the painting. It's 8.5 feet tall and 10.5 feet wide, and this is after it's being rehung because there was a Delacroix exhibition at the Louvre about 2 years ago, and so this is the rehanging of the painting. I like this guy here. He looks, even though he's probably one of the crew, he's just gawping at the painting. He loves it. That's great. And I hope you won't mind this. This is obviously pre-virus. Something that I love to do is to go and get my photograph taken in front of famous works of art. And at the time, Mona Lisa was in a different part of the museum, and so we didn't have the huge crowds over in the Denon wing of the Louvre, and so you were able to go and see these great paintings virtually by yourself. It was fantastic. But good place to end on. One of the most inspiring paintings to look at, an essential part of any visit to the Louvre, the Liberty Leading the People by the wonderful Eugene Delacroix. Thank you.